Good morning, students. At the interface of cell biology and biochemistry are the biochemical pathways that regulate cell division and cell death. Now, in order to maintain cellular homeostasis in a mature organism, an equal number of cells are born and die within a set unit of time. Thus, cell division must be balanced by cell death, and both cell division and cell death pathways are equally active. Now, aberrations in these pathways often lead to development of cancers. And in this lecture, that is part 1 of this lecture, we will try to understand the biochemical basis of cancer. And in second part of this lecture, we'll understand what is programmed cell death, or what we usually call as apoptosis. Now, the very purpose of this lecture is to make you understand the mechanisms of how cancer develops, the biochemical basis of it. Now, you must be wondering, how is it relevant to you as your training as a doctor? So now let me apprise you with the fact that cancers constitute the second most common cause of death after cardiovascular diseases in US and of course many other countries. So I hope I don't need to emphasize the need of knowing and reading and thinking upon this topic. So let's start. So the competency covered for the couple of lectures, the two parts of this lecture are BI 10.1, and after the lecture you should be able to describe and discuss etiology of metabolism seen in cancer cells. What is the process of tumor initiation and progression, including metastasis? Also, you should be able to enlist various genes involved in the development of cancer, that is proto-oncogenes, oncogenes and tumor suppressor genes. And in part 2 of this lecture, we'll be talking about apoptosis. What is the difference between apoptosis and necrosis, and the biochemical mechanism of apoptosis. Okay. So, before I actually talk about what are the major features of cancer cells, few terms first. So, what's a neoplasm? A neoplasm refers to any abnormal new growth of tissue. It may be benign or malignant in nature. The term cancer is usually associated with malignant tumors. Now, cancer cells are characterized by certain key properties. Two major properties acquired by a cancer cell are unregulated cell division, that is, they proliferate rapidly, limitlessly. Second major property is they have resistance to apoptosis. They can evade programmed cell death. They are able to do that. Malignant cancer cells also exhibit cellular immortality, the ability to induce angiogenesis, that is blood vessel growth, and they have ability to metastasize, that is they can move from one place to another. Now, cellular immortality, it is the ability of a cell to produce infinite generations of progeny. Mortal cells such as normal human epithelial cells in cell culture, they divide to produce 20 to 40 generations and then enter senescence. Cells in culture derived from an immortal cell, they continue to divide indefinitely. I don't know if you have heard of this movie, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. I'm sure you must have heard in +2, I guess, HeLa cells, HeLa, HeLa cells. So those cells were actually isolated from this lady Henrietta Lacks, and I must say that we all should be thankful to that lady because of the cell line that that she gave. On that basis, a lot of research is still being carried out till date, and we are reaping benefit out of it. So if you get time, do watch this movie. Not very good on IMDb rating, but worth watching. Anyways, so okay. So angiogenesis or sustained blood vessel growth. What is this? This refers to the growth of new blood vessels, and this is required to provide a growing tumor mass with nutrients and oxygen for survival and continued growth. Now the malignant tumor cell also has the ability to metastasize. The metastasis of cancer cells to grow tumors at multiple sites is what usually kills patients with cancer. In blood-borne metastasis, tumor cells dissociate from their contacts with other cells within the tumor mass. They pass through the basement membrane and the surrounding extracellular matrix into the capillaries, travel through the blood to a target tissue, extravasate out of the blood vessels and proliferate in the new site to form a secondary tumor. That is what is called as metastasis. Also, cancer cells are self-sufficient. They are self-sufficient in growth signals, and also they are insensitive to anti-growth signals. Okay, so genes that contribute to the properties of cancer cells, as mentioned in the last lecture also, they may be considered as proto-oncogenes. So proto-oncogenes, when activated, they become oncogenes, and there are certain pathways by which oncogene pathways operate. So oncogene pathways, they promote cell division, inhibit apoptosis, promote cellular immortality, promote tumor metastasis, and also promote angiogenesis. Vice versa, the genes which inhibit these properties are rightly called tumor suppressor genes. Tumor suppressor pathways, how do they operate? Just like opposite of oncogene pathways, they inhibit cell division, promote apoptosis, inhibit cellular immortality, inhibit cancer cell metastasis, and also inhibit angiogenesis. Now this figure here depicts various biochemical and genetic changes that are observed in cancer cells. Of course, in addition to the features that I mentioned in the very first slide, depicting major features of cancer cells. So let's discuss a few here. So the roles of mutations in activating oncogenes and inactivating tumor suppressor genes we will discuss in detail subsequently. Abnormalities of cell cycle or cell cycling and of chromosome and chromosome structure, including aneuploidy, are common. Alterations of expression of specific mRNAs and regulatory hnRNAs have been reported, and in fact the relationship of stem cells to cancer cells is a very active area of research. Now, from your previous knowledge, I am sure you know what are telomeres and their functions. And organisms are able to generate progeny that contain full-length telomeres thanks to the intervention of the enzyme telomerase. Now, telomerase is a ribonucleoprotein that is expressed in stem cells and most cancer cells, but not in somatic cells. Using an RNA template, telomerase adds GT-rich hexanucleotide repeat sequences ranging from a few hundred to several thousand nucleotides in length to the ends of linear DNA molecules to restore their telomeres to full length. And tumors, sometimes they synthesize certain fetal antigens which may be measurable in blood. For example, Regan isoenzyme. Now, Regan isoenzyme is an isoenzyme of which enzyme I think if you have studied your practical classes, so you must be knowing what is Regan isoenzyme. If not, please read about it, and if it's not clear, please come back with your doubt. Okay. Now, changes in plasma membrane constituents, they have been detected in many studies and may be of importance in relation to decreased cell addition and metastasis. For example, alteration of the sugar chains of various glycoproteins, some of which are cell addition molecules and glycolipids. Now, various molecules are released from cancer cells in either soluble or membrane-bound vesicular forms, and they can be detected in the blood or extracellular fluid. These include metabolites, lipids, carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids. Also, angiogenic factors and various proteinases like metalloproteinases, these are also released by some tumors which act on the extracellular matrix. Then there are many changes which have been observed in metabolism of cancer cells. For example, cancer cells often exhibit a high rate of aerobic glycolysis. So these were some of the biochemical and genetic changes that occur in human cancer cells, and I think if you read about them, you will certainly remember these changes because it's not difficult to remember also. Okay. So, talking about causes of cancer, in general there are three classes of carcinogens, exposure to which result in tumor formation. These are radiant energy, chemicals, and certain oncogenic viruses. The first two, that is radiant energy, UV rays, X-rays, gamma rays, and chemicals, they cause mutations in DNA. And the third class, the viruses, they generally act by introducing novel genes into normal cells. They introduce some new genes into the normal cells. Now, talking about radiant energy, ultraviolet rays, X-rays and gamma rays are mutagenic and carcinogenic. Mutations in DNA due to damages as mentioned here, for example formation of pyrimidine dimers or formation of apurinic or apyrimidinic sites or formation of single strand breaks or double strand breaks. These are thought to be the basic mechanism of carcinogenicity caused by radiant energy, although the exact pathways are still under investigation. Additionally, X-rays and gamma rays, they can induce formation of reactive oxygen species, ROS. I'm sure I must have had talked about ROS generation due to radiation when I took lecture on free radical species and antioxidant mechanisms. So X-rays and gamma rays, what do? They can induce formation of ROS that are mutagenic and probably contribute to the carcinogenic effects of radiant energy. And as we all know that exposure to UV radiation, this is common due to exposure to sunlight, which is its main source. And ample evidence actually exists to show that such radiation is linked to cancers of the skin. And the risk of developing a skin cancer due to UV radiation increases with increasing frequency and intensity of exposure and decreasing melanin content of skin. So no wonders that dermatologists advise you to use sunscreen very very appropriately, and also we witness that the incidence of skin cancers is more in the Western world where melanin content of skin is actually less. Okay. Now coming to the second category of carcinogens, that is chemicals. Okay. So a wide variety of chemical compounds are carcinogenic as mentioned here in the table, including polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, aromatic amines and nitrosamines and etc. A lot of things. So it is estimated that perhaps 80% of human cancers are caused by environmental factors, principally chemicals. And if these factors can be regulated, the incidence of cancers may be reduced by greater than 75%. That's a huge number. So you may be surprised to know that only cigarette smoking is responsible for approximately 30% of cancer deaths in United States. So overall, most chemical carcinogens are thought to covalently modify DNA, thereby forming a wide range of nucleotide adducts. So depending on the extent of damage to DNA and its repair by DNA repair systems, a variety of mutations in DNA can result from exposure of an animal or human to chemical carcinogens, some of which contribute to the development of cancer. Some chemicals interact directly with DNA, but others, termed as procarcinogens, they require conversion by enzyme action to become ultimate carcinogens. The oxygen and nitrogen atoms in DNA bases, these are the targets for a variety of electrophiles or electron-seeking chemical species, which most ultimate carcinogens are. Chemical carcinogens found in the environment and ingested in food are generally stable lipophilic compounds that like dimethylnitrosamine. This so they must be activated by metabolism in the body to react with DNA. So in the figure given here, I have shown a typical sequence of events leading to a mutation for dimethylnitrosamine. So after undergoing oxidation in liver, the activated methyl group of dimethylnitrosamine is transferred to guanine. Now during replication, methylguanine base pairs with thymine, introducing a mutation into subsequent generations. So this was one example. And about nitrosamines, these are consumed in many natural products and are produced in the stomach from nitrites used as preservatives and secondary amines found in foods such as fish. And no wonders they are believed to be responsible for high incidence of gastric cancer in Japan and Iceland, where salt preserved fish is a major dietary item. Now, many chemotherapeutic agents which are designed to kill proliferating cells by interacting with DNA, they may also act as carcinogens and cause new mutations and tumors while eradicating the old. Okay. So chemical carcinogenesis, it comprises two stages, that is initiation and promotion. Initiation is the stage where exposure to a chemical causes irreversible damage, and it's a necessary initial event for a cell to become cancerous. Promotion, it comprises the stage at which an initiated cell begins to grow and proliferate abnormally. And of course, the cumulative effect of these two stages is a neoplasm. Now, how do you identify whether a chemical is carcinogenic or not? So, the chemical carcinogens can be identified by testing for their ability to induce mutations. And a simple way to do this is by using the Ames assay or Amy's assay. So this relatively simple test, which detects mutations in Salmonella typhimurium caused by chemicals, has proven very valuable for screening purposes. So the bacteria used is Salmonella typhimurium, and a refinement of the Ames test is to add an aliquot of mammalian endoplasmic reticulum to the assay to make it possible to identify procarcinogens. Now you must be wondering, why would you add an aliquot of post mitochondrial supernatant which contains endoplasmic reticulum to the culture media? The answer lies in your in the knowledge that you already have. So the conversion of chemicals to ultimate carcinogens, it is principally due to the actions of various species of cytochrome P450, which is located in the endoplasmic reticulum. So usually a supernatant of when you fractionate the cell components, a supernatant containing endoplasmic reticulum, it is added to the assay system as a source of cytochrome P450 enzymes. Now let's see how Ames assay is actually performed. So several strains of bacteria Salmonella typhimurium They carry mutations in genes involved in histidine synthesis. I'll repeat. They normally carry mutations in genes involved in histidine synthesis, and these strains are known as auxotrophic mutants. Auxotrophic mutants, denoted by HIS and a sign of negative, histidine negative. That is, they require histidine for growth as they cannot produce it on their own. So, Ames test basically tests the capability of the test substance referred as suspected mutagen in this particular figure. So it tests the capability of the suspected mutagen in creating mutations that result in prototrophic state of the bacteria, that is histidine positive, or in other words, now this strain can grow on histidine free media because a mutation has occurred due to the chemical carcinogen. Histidine negative was converted to histidine positive because the strain can produce histidine of its own. It doesn't need histidine from outside. The strain can now grow on the histidine free media. Now let's see what are the exact steps. So what do? You isolate an auxotrophic Salmonella typhimurium for histidine. You prepare a test suspension of histidine negative in a plain buffer. Also, you prepare a histidine negative control suspension, that is, which doesn't have the suspected mutagen or the test chemical. Now you incubate the suspensions at 37 degrees Celsius for 20 minutes. Next step is you spread the suspensions on two different agar plates. In this figure, the control plate is not shown here because it is not shown here. So it contains a solvent in which the suspected mutagen is dissolved, but certainly it does not have suspected mutagen. Now after inoculation in the agar media, you again incubate both the plates at 37 degrees Celsius for 48 hours. After 48 hours, you count the colonies formed in each plate, right? Now there could be two scenarios. If chemical is a mutagen, many colonies will form because the chemical tested increased the frequency of reversion of histidine negative to histidine positive cells. Histidine negative turned into histidine positive cells because the mutagen which was there, it had the potential of inducing a mutation and converting the auxotrophic mutant to prototrophic state, right? On the other hand, if chemical is not a mutagen, far fewer colonies are formed which are not even appreciable. And of course, one limitation of this test is you are testing it on a bacterial cell population but not on human cells. So it's kind of a screening test. Okay. Now coming to the third etiology, that is viruses, oncogenic viruses. So approximately 15% of human cancers, they may be caused by viruses. Both DNA and RNA viruses have been identified as being able to cause cancers in humans, as shown in the table here, like EB virus. It's a DNA virus and it has been implicated in causing Burkitt's lymphoma, and nasopharyngeal carcinoma. Then hepatitis B and C, they have been implicated in development of hepatocellular carcinoma, and HPV 16 and 18 in cervical cancer development. So there are a lot of them. I have just enlisted few here. So in general, the genetic material of viruses is incorporated into the genome of the host cell. In the case of RNA virus, for example, hepatitis C virus, this would occur after reverse transcription of the viral RNA to viral DNA, and such integration of viral DNA called the provirus. जो viral DNA है उसको हम कहते हैं provirus, which is formed after reverse transcription. So ऐसी जो integration होती है with the host DNA, this results in various events such as deregulation of the cell cycle, inhibition of apoptosis, and abnormalities of the cell signaling pathways. DNA viruses often act by down-regulating the expression and or function of tumor suppressor genes like P53 and RB and their protein products. Okay. So besides these three major causes, certain other causes like environmental and lifestyle factors are also there. So this slide enlists the various environmental causes, cultural factors, some of which are established and few are just thought to be responsible for development of various cancers. Like cigarette smoking, this predisposes to lung cancer, we all know. Inadequate folate levels, they have been implicated as a risk factor for colon and breast cancers. Early onset of menarche, obesity, and lack of physical activity, these are associated with increased risk of breast cancer in women. And many cancers can be prevented by modifying risk factors. It has been estimated that approximately 50% of cancers could be prevented if measures like reducing tobacco use, increasing physical activity, weight control, improving diet, limiting alcohol intake, using safe sex practices, routine cancer screening tests, and last but not the least, avoiding excessive exposure to the sun. So if introduced on a population-wide basis, they can 50% of the cancers can actually be prevented. So of course it cannot be overemphasized that prevention and early detection of cancer, these are two most critical points if the disease is to be beaten. Okay. So in my last lecture on cell cycle, I told you about proto-oncogenes and oncogenes. So here is a new term now, which is tumor suppressor genes. So like the oncogenes, the tumor suppressor genes encode molecules involved in the regulation of cell proliferation. I'll give few examples of tumor suppressor genes in subsequent slides. Most commonly we talk about P53 and RB, that is retinoblastoma. So the normal function of tumor suppressor proteins, the proteins that are coded by tumor suppressor genes, the normal function is generally to inhibit proliferation in response to certain signals such as DNA damage. The signal is removed when the cell is fully equipped to proliferate, and the effect of the elimination of tumor suppressor genes is to remove the brakes on cell growth. I'll again repeat. So when the signal is removed, when the cell is fully equipped to proliferate, the effect of the elimination of tumor suppressor genes, that is to remove the brakes on cell growth. So tumor suppressor genes, they affect cell cycle regulation, signal transduction, transcription and cell adhesion. And the products of tumor suppressor genes frequently modulate pathways that are activated by the products of proto-oncogenes. Tumor suppressor genes, they contribute to the development of cancer when both copies of the gene are inactivated. So, adding a trivia here, amongst the major advances that have happened in understanding how cancer cells develop and grow, the two key findings were the discoveries of actually oncogenes and tumor suppressor genes. And there were two great people, I would name them doctors Michael Bishop and Harold Varmus. They demonstrated that cancer is not caused by unusual and novel genes, but it is rather caused by mutation within existing cellular genes, and that for every gene that causes cancer, for every oncogene there is a corresponding gene called the proto-oncogene. Although this concept seems very straightforward today, but it was significant when it was first announced, and in 1989 doctors Bishop and Varmus, they were awarded a Nobel Prize in medicine for this. So the figure here basically summarizes the overall effects of oncogenes and loss of activity of tumor suppressor genes. MicroRNAs, about which you must have had read in molecular biology, not shown here in the figure, they are also affected by mutations, and that can affect their normal regulatory functions. And in addition, epigenetic changes, again not shown here, they also affect gene expression and hence growth of cancer cells. Okay. Now talking about the relationship of proto-oncogenes to oncogenes, the process of malignant transformation can result from infection with transforming viruses which carry oncogene sequences, or via carcinogen induced conversion of wild type proto-oncogene into a cellular oncogene, sometimes compounded by genetic predisposition in the host cell. Cellular oncogenes arise due to DNA changes that alter expression of proto-oncogenes, including DNA mutations that result in the production of qualitatively different gene products, as well as DNA amplification or chromosomal translocation, leading to increased or decreased expression of these gene products. Normal tissues, they maintain homeostasis through a tightly regulated process of cell proliferation balanced by cell death. And an imbalance at either end of the scale encourages development of cancerous state. The genes involved in these homeostatic processes, they work by producing proteins that either encourage or discourage cellular proliferation and survival. Not surprisingly, it is the disruption of these same growth regulating genes that accounts for most, if not all, forms of cancer. Normal cellular genes that are associated with the formation of cancer fall into three major categories based on their activities: oncogenes, tumor suppressor genes, and genes involved in programmed cell death, or what we call as apoptosis. Let's see them one by one. So, as discussed earlier, oncogenes are involved in cell growth promoting processes, and on the flip side, tumor suppressor genes, they play the opposite role in homeostasis, that is dampening cellular growth and proliferation. Unlike oncogenes, which become the villain when their activity is enhanced, tumor suppressor genes, also known as anti-oncogenes, they become involved in cancer induction when they fail. Finally, many of the genes involved in apoptosis have also been associated with cancer, as these genes either enforce or inhibit cell death signals. Okay. So, firstly, talking about genes that induce cellular proliferation. In normal cells, the expression of growth factors and their receptors is carefully regulated. Usually, one population of cells secretes a growth factor that acts on another population of cells, which carries the receptor for the factor, thus stimulating proliferation of the second population. Inappropriate expression of either a growth factor or its receptor can result in uncontrolled proliferation. For example, in breast cancer, increased synthesis of the growth factor receptor encoded by CNU has been linked with a poor prognosis. Other oncogenes in this category encode products that function in signal transduction pathways or as transcription factors. For example, the SRC and ABL oncogenes. They encode tyrosine kinases, and the RAS oncogene, which encodes a GTP binding protein. So the products of these genes act as signal transducers. The MYC, JUN and FOS oncogenes, they all encode transcription factors. Overactivity of any of these oncogenes may result in unregulated proliferation. A second category of cancer-associated genes called tumor suppressor genes or anti-oncogenes. They encode proteins that inhibit excessive cell proliferation. In their normal state, tumor suppressor genes prevent cells from progressing the cell cycle inappropriately, functioning like brakes. And a release of this inhibition or a release of these brakes is essentially what can lead to cancer. The prototype of this category of genes is RB gene, retinoblastoma gene. Hereditary retinoblastoma, it's a rare childhood cancer in which tumors develop from neural precursor cells in the immature retina, and the affected child inherits a mutated RB allele. Later, somatic inactivation of the remaining RB allele is what leads to tumor growth. Now, unlike oncogenes where a single allele alteration can lead to unregulated growth, tumor suppressor genes require a two-hit disabling sequence, as the one functional allele is enough to suppress the development of cancer. Probably the single most frequent genetic abnormality seen in human cancer, found in 60% of all tumors, is mutation in the TP53 gene. This tumor suppressor gene encodes P53, which is a nuclear phosphoprotein with multiple cellular roles, including involvement in growth arrest, DNA repair, and apoptosis. And over 90% of small cell lung cancers and over 50% breast and colon cancers, they have been shown to be associated with mutations in this particular gene, that is TP53. A third category of cancer-associated genes is sequences involved in programmed cell death or apoptosis. These genes can encode proteins that either induce or block apoptosis. Pro-apoptotic genes like BAX, BIM and PUMA, they act like tumor suppressor genes, normally inhibiting cell survival, whereas anti-apoptotic genes behave more like oncogenes, promoting cell survival. Thus, a failure of the former or overactivity of the latter can encourage neoplastic transformation of cells. Included in this category are genes such as BCL2 and anti-apoptosis gene. This oncogene was originally discovered because of its association with B-cell follicular lymphoma. Since its discovery, BCL2 has been shown to play an important role in regulating cell survival during hematopoiesis and in the survival of selected B cells and T cells during maturation. Now this table, it's a very important table, and it summarizes the differences between oncogenes and tumor suppressor genes, and I don't need to emphasize it any further. It's very important for your professional exams as well as your entrance exams in future. So the main highlight is that in oncogenes, mutation in one of the two alleles is sufficient to produce oncogenic effects, and in tumor suppressor genes, there has to be mutation in both the alleles to produce oncogenic effects. And there are few more differences also. You must learn them by heart. So tumor suppressor genes, they contribute to the development of cancer when both copies of the gene are inactivated. This is different from the case of proto-oncogene mutations because only one allele of a proto-oncogene needs to be converted to an oncogene to initiate transformation. Okay, moving further. As we have already discussed, an oncogene is an altered gene whose products act in a dominant manner to accelerate cell growth or cell division. Also, oncogenes are generated by activation of normal cellular proto-oncogenes, that is, genes encoding growth stimulating proteins. Now, such activations can be effected through any of the several different mechanisms as shown in the given table. I will talk about few here. RAS is an oncogene, rather a family of oncogene actually, which encodes small GTPases upon a point mutation occurring in it. So there happens a point mutation, and this gene starts producing small GTPases. Now, loss of the GTPase activity of this G protein. This results in chronic stimulation of activity of adenylyl cyclase, leading to cell proliferation. So normally क्या होता है, RAS जो है वो GTPase प्रोड्यूस करता है, और म्यूटेशन हो गई तो GTPase एक्टिविटी चली गई. अब क्या होगा, adenylyl cyclase की chronic stimulation रहेगी, which further transmits the signal, and there is uninhibited cell proliferation. Another way an oncogene can be activated is via insertion of an enhancer and or strong promoter upstream of a protein coding region, resulting in increased transcription and hence protein expression, the cognate gene. So let's understand this with the help of a diagram. So in figure A here, only one strand of DNA of a normal chicken chromosome is depicted, showing the inactive, showing an inactive MYC gene, MYC gene. So what has happened here? An avian leukemia virus. It has integrated in the chromosome in its proviral form, that is a DNA copy of its RNA genome. It has integrated adjacent to the MYC gene. Now its right hand long terminal repeat LTR, which contains a strong promoter. This is now lying just upstream of the MYC gene, and this activates the gene, resulting in transcription of the MYC mRNA. Overproduction of the transcription factor MYC activates the transcription of the cell cycle regulatory genes and hence stimulates cell proliferation. Enhancer insertion acts similarly, except that the site of integration may be downstream or considerably upstream, and it cannot act as promoter. Instead, a specific proviral sequence acts as an enhancer element, leading to activation of the MYC gene and its transcription. Okay. Now, the second, there are other mechanisms also, like chromosomal translocation. What happens that a piece of one chromosome will be split off and joined to another. Let us understand this with one example. So figure B here shows you the schematic representation of reciprocal translocation, which is involved in development of Burkitt lymphoma. So the chromosomes involved here are 8 and 14. What happens? A segment from the end of the Q arm, a segment from the end of the Q arm of chromosome 8 breaks off and moves to chromosome 14. The reverse process moves a small segment from the Q arm of the chromosome 14 to chromosome 8. Now this MYC gene is contained in the small piece of chromosome 8 that was transferred to chromosome 14. Now it is thus placed next to genes transcribing the heavy chains of immunoglobulin molecules, and it itself becomes activated. Many other translocations have been identified, the best known being that involved in the formation of Philadelphia chromosome, which is a cause of CML, that is chronic myeloid leukemia. Okay. So last but not the least, the mechanism is gene amplification. You must have had read in genetics about this and must be aware of that cancer cells become resistant to action of methotrexate. That is a case of tumor drug resistance, and the mechanism responsible is actually gene amplification. So moving further. Now when we have already talked about the various mechanisms of activating oncogenes, let's see how activated oncogenes promote cancer through a variety of mechanisms as shown in this figure. So the protein products of activated oncogenes, they affect cell signaling pathways where they may act as a growth factor. For example, fibroblast growth factor 3 FGF3 coded by INT2 gene, or they may act as a growth factor receptor. For example, epidermal growth factor receptor EGFR, which is coded by HER1 gene, or they may act as a G protein. They may act as a downstream signaling molecule, for example, a transcription factor, a tyrosine kinase involved in cell-cell addition, or they may act as a cell cycle regulator, or a regulator of apoptosis. So collectively, all these mechanisms help to explain quite a few features which cancer cells show. For example, limitless replicative potential, local invasion and metastasis, and evasion of apoptosis, to name a few. Okay, now with this figure I wanted you to tell you sequential genetic changes that lead to development of metastatic colon cancer. Mutations in the APC genes initiate the formation of adenomas, with formation of numerous dysplastic aberrant crypts, also called as ACFs. Each of the stages indicated in figure A is morphologically different. As you can see in figure B, in this sequence, benign colorectal polyps, they progress to carcinoma following mutations resulting in the inactivation or loss of 3 tumor suppressor genes, that is APC, DCC and TP53, and the activation of one oncogene linked to cellular proliferation, that is KRAS. The table here mentions the various genes associated with development of colon cancer. As you can appreciate, P53 gene is also involved, as loss of function occurs in it. And I'll not go into detail of colorectal carcinogenesis mechanism, how and what all genes are affected. You can just remember few names like APC, KRAS, and of course P53, and definitely know that which one is an oncogene, which one is a tumor suppressor gene, or which one is a inducer or suppressor of apoptosis. Okay. Growth factors and abnormalities of their receptors and signaling pathways, they play major roles in development of cancer. Now the table here enlists few growth factors and their functions. I must tell you few important points about growth factors. Growth factors, they can act in an endocrine, paracrine or autocrine manner. They affect a wide variety of cells, produce a mitogenic response. Also, they play important roles in the differentiation of cells. Growth factors, they work via specific receptors and transmembrane signaling to affect the activities of specific genes. And the receptors generally have short membrane spanning segments and external and cytoplasmic domains. You will read more about this in when you read about mechanism of action of hormones and signal transduction, which would be probably covered in the subsequent classes. And growth inhibitory factors, they also exist, something called growth inhibitory factors. For example, transforming factor beta, TGF beta. This exerts inhibitory effects on the growth of certain cells. So, moral of the story is that growth factors interact with specific receptors to stimulate specific signaling pathways that serve to increase or decrease the activities of various genes that affect cell division. To conclude this lecture, this part of lecture, I have enlisted few hereditary cancer conditions here, and it is estimated that approximately 5% of cancers, they have a hereditary basis, and in such cases where a hereditary syndrome is suspected, appropriate genetic screening of families has allowed early intervention to be made. To cite an example, some young women who have inherited either a mutated BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene, they have opted for prophylactic mastectomies to prevent cancer of the breast occurring in later life. But I doubt this kind of prophylactic approach is, I'm sure, rare to find. So Yeah, this finishes part 1 of lecture on cancer and programmed cell death. In part 2 of this lecture, I will talk about apoptosis and necrosis, the differentiating features between the two, and of course a bit about metastasis. And that will be a shorter lecture than this. Okay, so thank you.